which are part of acting on policy. And then we'll have a second part entitled Acting on the Ground. We'll have two more presentations in this part. We'll have a presentation by Ana Maria Gaterel. I hope she can correct my pronunciation there. She'll talk about the context in Romania. And then we'll move on to our panelist, Conchi Moru, who is part of the Galician Labour Syndicate. So we'll have these two sections, acting on policy and then acting on the ground. And then we'll finally move into a question and answer and debate session with the panelists and participants. So the idea is that anyone who wants to participate can do so. You could do that through the Q&A functionality on Zoom. That will help us to keep a thread of reactions and ideas about the different questions and comments. We'll just choose out a few of the questions and read them out loud for the panelists. Nevertheless, if anyone wants to take the floor and they want to make a comment or ask a question to the panelists out loud, you can also do so by raising your hand. Then we'll let you know when you've been given the floor. We would just like to remind you that this conference is being simultaneously interpreted into 3 languages, into English, into Spanish, and into French. You can use the interpreting option on the Zoom interface. So we're just going to open up this conference, as I said, which is focused specifically on the case of Europe. The other European conference focuses on Brazil more specifically. And remember that the opening conference on the 31st of January was part of the Brazilian organization. And that focuses on Brazil and the countries in the south. Here today, we have the European context with important differences compared to what we've seen in the case of the south. But it's important to identify these elements which are the same, which are parallel to all of the realities across the world. I think there'll be important conclusions that we'll be able to take from this session of presentations. So after this introduction, I'm going to open up the first part, which is entitled Acting on Policies. We'll have 2 presentations. If you have any questions or comments about these 2 presentations that we're going to listen to, we can open up a question and answer session for both sessions, or if you want, we can just leave them all to the end. So we'll see how that goes depending on your reactions. I'm going to give the floor to our first panelist, Elias Moreau. As we've said, he's part of the European coordination Via Campesina, and his speech is entitled Peasant Proposition for a European Directive on Agricultural Land Governance. I'd like to ask Elias to quickly introduce himself before moving on to his presentation. So now I'll give the floor to Elias Moreau.
Thank you, Christian. I'm going to speak French. Nice to meet everybody. I'm very happy to work with you. My name is Elias. I'm the coordinator of the working group of Via Campesina Europe, and we work on agricultural borders and land. We haven't managed to get farmers to come and represent our working group. Usually they represent themselves, and I'm just part of the staff. But exceptionally, today I'm the person who's going to present our work to you. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Land concentration in Europe is an issue that affects everyone. So we have created a proposition for a European regulation on agricultural land. And what is this? It's the most powerful legal instrument within the European Union, which gives states the power to act upon certain fields. There was a regulation on water at the start of the noughts, which allowed the use of natural resources. Now, today, we're going to explain this farmer's proposition about agricultural land. How will it happen? First, I'm going to explain to you why we have this proposal, where it comes from. Then I'll present the key points for a land regulation. And then we'll talk about next steps. So why do we need this directive? We like to speak about this in a more historical context. In 2012, there was a European mobilization in Romania that fought a company called Iron Gold Corporation, which worked in a village, and it was an extraction-based company that had a large mine and was using local agricultural land. And since that happened, there was a large European mobilization that laid the foundations for a very broad movement to speak about land concentration, report it, and spread awareness about this phenomenon. From then onwards, several networks were established, particularly the Hands of the Land group, which documented this phenomenon. In Europe, we talk about land concentration. But to explain what this is, I'm going to give some figures, so we can get an idea of what it looks like. The amount of farms between 2003 and 2006 fell by 30% from 15 to 10 million. So we lost 5 million farms in 15 years. Farms are becoming larger, and in Europe, half of land is controlled by 3% of farms. And that led to an increase in land prices. In Holland, a hectare cost up to 65,000 euro. So this is very specific. There is an example of a bank, a Dutch bank, which has bought hundreds of thousands of hectares in Romania. In France, the same thing happens with Chanel in the south of France. So it's something very specific, but it's quite a secretive phenomenon that's happening. Since 2015, the European Union started to work on the subject. First, the Economic and Social European Committee wrote an initial report on this phenomenon. Elias, do you have another slide? Or yeah, I'm still working on the introduction. I'm going to tell the story, the history of this first. So in 2015, this committee created a report on the threat of land concentration and how it threatens family-based agricultural practices. It's the first European report on this issue, and it says that land is not an asset to be bought and sold. It's a limited resource that normal market practices don't apply to. So we invite states to establish limits to these kinds of transactions. It's important to know that peasant and farmer movements have presented many claims to spread awareness about this land concentration phenomenon. In 2017, the European Parliament created a new report with a holistic approach to agriculture in Europe, not only based on economic factors, but also on social, cultural, and ecological factors. The Parliament recommends to prioritize youth. It reminds us how important this is for European food sovereignty, and it also presents the concerns of creating public land and establishing prices for this land. Another important point in this report, and which is recognized, is the impact of the European Union on land. It's important to know that the four basic freedoms are the freedom of capital, people, goods. This is what shapes our approach to land policy. And through the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, and other policies that are being developed, such as the carbon economy or policies for territorial cohesion, through these policies, the European Union is working on land concentration. There are payments per hectare, for example, for land, and that promotes land concentration in general. So this leads to a proposal for a harmonized land governance policy. We were there before and after this proposal, and we said, okay, we do need a regulation that is harmonized. As I said, there is already one on water. Land, soil is a natural resource, as the European Union recognize it. So the CVC has decided to draft a proposal on agricultural land. This proposal by peasants, we're not specialists on European law, but it was an opportunity to look at different realities that exist. So we're not. 5 minutes have already passed, just so you know. So we're not experts on European law, but we have still managed to look at the situation of land in each country to present a proposal based on the Declaration of Farmers' Rights of the United Nations, signed in 2017, and then the link with the VGGTs for land governance and for forests and water policy. We use these two texts to create our proposal. What are the key points of this proposal? There are measures to prevent land concentration, to facilitate access to land, to encourage agroecological use of land, to protect common and public land, and to create measures for forest and coastal land. I'm going to close this my window because I've got noise coming in, sorry.
Désolé pour cela. Donc voilà, tout ça, c'est les éléments clés. Maintenant, s'il vous plaît, je vais les
I'm
passer.
sorry for this. So now I'm going to show you which are proposals to make some progress. When we want to prevent land grabbing and land concentration, we want to focus on the use of land. What I mean is the shares in companies and property and renting. We are proposing a measure to limit the areas to 500 hectares. For example, in the case of Romania, it should be a measure that could be used. We also want the member states to implement the measure of this mechanism that could help limit to land concentration in Europe. For example, if a land has more than 500 hectares, this law could tackle this issue. Then, as it is extremely important to facilitate access to land, we want to talk about the implementation of national observatories of farmland sales. And we should also limit land prices to go against some tendencies of raising prices. We should also facilitate access to land to different projects of different agricultural people. We should also establish some soil protection measures. This could help us follow the rules as the Via Campesina is doing. We can see the details in the different laws that we are applying. What could be done, for example, to follow the rules from the European Union, for example, to prevent the use of artificial products in our lands. These artificial products are part of the debate and the social debate that we are having right now. We should also take into account that we need the people that are working in our lands. We need them in their lands. We are having in Europe many public lands that are part of the municipality, for example, and these collective lands, for example, in Scotland, they are forcing people to buy the lands if it is in interest of the public interest. I want to say that we have a German we shouldn't forget that peasants of the seas and peasants of the land sometimes are linked to peasants that work in the forests. So we should include all of these professions. And I want to give an example. For example, the peasants of the people of the Peasants Federation are following a law, a framework for the different products from the sea, like mussels, and they need to change their installations depending on the land and the products they have. We have a strategy for institutions, for alliance, and for national laws. But these should be applied in different countries. And of course, there are European laws in order to do this, but then there are some national laws also that should be applied in the different countries. We have also, and we should remember that we have the United Nations directive for the earth. And that was everything. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you so much, Elias, for that. Those comments. I'd like to remember everybody, all participants at the moment, that there is this possibility to share the comment that you want to share. So I'll just put this message on our screens, so you might be able to use the Zoom option to give some comments, and as well as to, if somebody wants to raise her hand or his hand, we will give the option for that person to say a few words, to say the idea. And also the simultaneous interpretation is available also in the Zoom platform. Also, now to continue concerning the policies, we'll give the floor to Robert Lebesque. He is the president of ACTER, and his presentation has the title of Stop the land grabbing in the French context. So let's give the floor to Robert Lebesque.
Excusez-moi, Robert, vous avez coupé le micro. Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
I'm sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. Thank you very much for your presentation. This is going to help us to understand about the concentration of land in France and the things that we can do. I'm going to share the French situation in order to see what we can do to stop with concentration of land. We should start by understanding what this means. It is the control of the use of extreme big lands. This could be done by peasants that sometimes use external services in order to control their properties, their lands. This means that the control, the financial control, is in the hands of the people who are managing the lands. The idea is that we should be able to control this financial power. In France, we have 15% of the agricultural land that is used by these companies, and what they have is an open capital. So people that are working with them could have the social share of it. Nowadays, there are lands that are controlled not by agriculture companies, but from people who are not peasants. So how do we do this? We have an example. If a peasant creates an agricultural company, let's say that person has 100% of the capital of that company, then in the moment the person wants to retire, another person would take control of that company. But that new person can control different parts of the company, or yes, let's say different branches of the company. What is the result of this? This could lead to the misappropriation of financial resources, and we should take into account that European funds should follow Article 39 of the European Union Treaty. And as I was saying, the same person can control different branches of this company, agricultural company, so they can benefit from different funds. For example, in France, we have a fund for the 52 first hectares of land. I'm going to give you an example. There was a company that could receive 12 times the funds because they were controlling different branches of the same company. It means they could receive a fund for more than 600 hectares of land when they were having only 52. This is just an example of the land concentration. These Another example is that sometimes we don't have a correct estimation of the production unity. We know that there are thousands of exploitations, agricultural exploitations, that are not well estimated in the hectares. So they don't receive the funds they should be receiving. In France, till now, the government controls the market of selling of land. So the capital transfer could be controlled then by the government. So the deputies have proposed a law in order to have some regulation of the social capital in the companies, in the agricultural companies. This new law was implemented on the 23rd of December 2021, sorry. So it is a very new law, and this could help to control the capital, the financial capital of the agricultural companies. This could also consolidate small lands and small farms, and this could also help to control this issue in France. About different measures of control, we have different issues. The government must first know about the different actions in the companies. And the government must give the agreement or not to the measures that the company wants to establish. Of course, if the government doesn't accept what the company wants to do, for example, the infrastructures they want to apply, the government must give the reasons for them not to accept this infrastructure, for example. Of course, there is a social debate about implementing stronger laws or not. But we should take into account that the control that the government can have would be applied only when the farms are only included in one department or only one region, and when it tackles the diminution of the hectares of the land. When the government doesn't give their authorization, let's imagine there is a family has the exploitation of their land, and the son wants to recover this exploitation from the family. For example, the family would make a donation to their son in order to be able to manage the land for the son. We need to finish. Yes. Okay. There is also a compensation system established in 2021. We've seen that some exploitations were recovered.
Et donc, l'autre faille, c'est à défaut de réponse de l'État, s'il ne répond pas avant 2 mois, le projet est agréé. Et puis,
The problem is that the process is still in place, so we still don't know what will happen. And we need to know what the sellers want to do, but we cannot access the archives of the company. And I think this is extremely important.
enfin, on pourra y revenir. Dans les... Bon, j'ai quand même 3 minutes encore.
I think I still have 3 or 5 minutes. Only 1 minute left. So when we talk about French regulations, the French law regulates the transfer of social capitals when we talk about the European law. So it is inside the European law. But we need to know who will benefit from this. And at a European level, we have quite a lot of experience to, for example, to fight terrorism. And the European Union, for example, for this, have asked to maintain archives, for example, from the police. So we know who has the control of the companies. We are only asking to do this for the peasants, also for the agricultural companies, in order to maintain the general interest. So I just want to finish by saying that peasant agriculture is a general interest for all of us. We need an agricultural policy that should be applied by all the agricultural companies. And as I don't have any more time, I'm going to finish here and thank you, all of you.
Esta intervención, específicamente del caso francés, siempre.
Thank you so much for explaining that French case, specifically in the French context, and explain a little bit more about the European context. So let's close up this section, speaking about the policies, and let's go to the second segment, which has interest on the land. So let's remind all the participants here, they have the possibility to ask questions at any time or to leave a comment to the panelists. If you have any comments, generally speaking, concerning the topic that we are discussing, you can do it through the Q&A section within the Zoom options, or you can raise your hands. We will give you the floor for a few minutes. So let's give the floor on this second segment. Let's discuss about land. We'll have 2 interventions. First one is going to be concerning the Romanian case. Oh, sorry, I have a question.
I'm sorry, I had a question.
Vamos a dar la palabra a esta pregunta.
Entonces, okay, let's give the floor for this question. So this second part is going to be Alicia speaking on the case of Romania. So first, we have this question, and it's from Les Amis de la Terre, the Friends of the Land. It's a question done in French, so I'm going to read it in French.
Why can't we access today the archives when this goes against the European law?
I'll repeat the question.
The law against the money laundering. Why can't we access the archives when it goes against the European directive against money laundering? So I want to let you talk and answer the question.
Je crois que la question me concerne, mais donc ce sont des déficits de données comme le cadastre n'est pas
As the question is quite difficult, I just want to say that these archives are only accessible to the financial minister. So, of course, there is a fight for this information to be open to everyone. We also did the same when we wanted to be able to know the funds that the different companies have received.
Segunda pregunta que plantea Emanuel. Él señala que
Now we'll move on to the second question about the movement of peasants, the peasant movement in Belgium. This question will also come in French. I'll read it in French.
pour la régulation des parts.
The question is, which is the law in France for the regulation of the social parties?
Robert, ton micro. Désolé, Robert, il y a encore une réaction de la part.
I'm sorry, Robert, there is another reaction from Emmanuel. Talks to Robert Levesque. Why do you think that limit in the law, the limit of only one transaction for the person who is going to get the company? For an agricultural land that is more than 1.5 times the total hectares of the exploitation.
Au détriment des plus petites fermes.
What I want to say is that we continue seeing concentrations of land, bigger and bigger. This goes against the smallest farms. So I think we should maintain or even increase the number of farms. But if we give authorization to this, then we cannot get the objective that we wanted.
Robert.
Thank you, Robert. Are there any other questions or comments before we move on to the second part? Okay, so now let's move on to the second part, acting on the ground. As we said previously, we'll have two presentations. The first will be given by Ana Maria Gattegel from Eco Ruralismo. The title of this presentation is Commons, Commoners and Food Sovereignty in Romania. So I'd like to give the floor to Ana Maria and ask her to just give a short introduction before she begins.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm trying to figure out the screen part. Yes, here it is. All right, so a short introduction about myself. My name is Ana Maria Gattegel, and I'm a member of Eco Ruralis. And last year, I was doing my research on commons and commoners and food sovereignty. So basically, this presentation will be about this, about common property regimes and management of common pastures in Transilvania. And as I mentioned, this presentation is done in collaboration with Ecoruralis, and Ecoruralis is the association of peasant women and men from Romania, and it's active since 2009. It's also a member of European Coordination of La Via Campesina since 2011. And it has 17,000 members, most of which are producers, so small-scale farmers and peasant farmers, but also support members like myself. I'm not directly a producer, but yeah, I do have connections with the countryside. And Ecoruralis, it works on 9 major areas related to food sovereignty. So among this, it's access to land, access to markets, access to resources in general, and also rural youth, and rural feminism as well. And as I was mentioning, I became a member in 2020, and I became a member as through their seed sharing campaign, which happens every year. And last year, I became a member of the Rights to Land Working Group, and my research is mostly focused, and I was doing mostly research on land commons. Before I go further to explain what are land commons, I will try to give a short overview of Romania. I think Elias already mentioned some issues and related to the Romanian case, but yeah, Romania, it's a largely peasant country, agrarian country, which means that farmers.
Ana Maria, I'm sorry. Sorry for interrupting you. It's necessary to speak more slowly in order to facilitate the work of the translators. Pour tous les panélistes, c'est important de parler un peu doucement, comme ça on va faciliter.
For all panelists, it's important to speak slowly for the interpreters.
Por favor, los panelistas, es importante que hablemos un poco más despacio para facilitar el trabajo de la traducción. Gracias. Perdona, sorry, Ana Maria, you can continue.
No worries, I'll try to make it slower, but I hope to make it's gonna then take more than 10 minutes. That's my problem. Anyway, coming back. So as I was saying, yeah, the Romania, it's a country mostly that has a lot of small scale farmers, and 90%, 95% of farmers work small plots of land. And they are covering 50% of total agricultural land. And also when Romania joined the EU in 2007, all of a sudden the peasant population, or like the farmer population, expanded. So Romania kind of added to that, 32% actually. And yeah, as it was already mentioned, Romania, it's part of the Common Agriculture Policy, or it's subject to the Common Agriculture Policy, which means that the subsidies are given per hectare, and which was mentioned already also, it facilitates land concentration. All right, moving on to what are land commons in a Romanian context. So in short, there are local agreements that went into the legislation, and they were formalized initially at the beginning of the 20th century, and then again after the fall of communism. So Romania has a communist past, and that kind of also changes circumstances as well. Another kind of extension of land commons. So there are resources that, in this case, forest and pasture, which are neither private nor public, so they cannot be easily categorized in terms of property regimes, and they have collective rights, or at least, yeah, the people managing this have collective rights. So the land cannot be alienated or sold in this context. And as I was mentioning already, commons are kind of a set of collective action institutions. In Romania, we have 3 different types, and yeah, I won't get into details here, but each has their own like arrangements and administration and specificities. And what is also very interesting is that the land under customary rights is unknown. So the extent to which land is subject to collective rights, it's unknown. Most of it also because of this ambiguous property regime. So some of the land commons, let's say, are the private property of municipalities, so kind of the state, but not really. And some of them are also private property of communities, but with this collective rights on top. So it's quite difficult to estimate, but there is also very little interest, let's say, from the state to untangle this whole situation. But independent studies show that more than half of the total grasslands in Romania are under collective rights, and also 14% of total national forests. So it's quite a large area. And why are they important? Basically, it's because it facilitates the access to land and land-based resources. So wood, grass, or like forest products for small scale or medium scale producers. And this also kind of, it's connected with the community economies, and also kind of facilitating the food sovereignty, but also increasing, having access to these commons. It also gives some sort of ecological knowledge and skills, and they are important because as this land cannot be easily alienated, this means that there is certain protection for habitats, and this allows for genetic diversity. And of course, in terms of aesthetic values, the landscapes are really beautiful. So they are also important from this perspective. All right, moving on. Who is managing the commons? This is a very complicated kind of equation, and I'm not sure I will manage to make it clear now, but there are basically 3 main actors. So this, as I mentioned already, the property regime is ambiguous, but so there, in each case, it depends to what extent are these actors involved, but it comes down to, so the main beneficiaries of these commons are farmers themselves, and they also they have access to the land and the products that come of the land, but also are the main managers. And this access, it's usually mediated. So it's mediated through legislation, of course, through the public institutions like state and state agencies. This could be also the subsidy payment agencies. We will see later in some cases that, this per hectare subsidy also plays a role in how these commons are managed. And in some cases, these land commons are the property of municipalities. So they are the main ones responsible to make it available for farmers. And we will see, I will say how that happens. And then here in the right corner up, we have also intermediary, let's say, or actors, and these are mostly historical associations, which are either owners. So as I mentioned, it's very context specific. So in some places, the historic associations are the owners of the resource themselves, and then they distribute it to the farmer. And in other cases, the farmer associations, which have like an NGO structure, they also make it available for the farmers. And in most of the cases, they are also the main beneficiaries from subsidies. So now some stories from the field and how they yeah, they are implemented. So I've done my research last year, and I chose 2 case studies. It's in one it's in Brasov and one in Sibiu. They're both in southern Transylvania, and even though they are similar in let's say structure, there are some differences there. So what's similar about this case is that the town hall, it's the main owner. So is the town hall, it's the owner of the pasture, and they allocate this pasture. It's by law, they have to allocate it to livestock farmers. But in the case of Prejmer in Brasov, there is an NGO, there is a livestock association, and this association by law has priority to get the land, and then the association further distributes it to its members. Here it's important to say that the association also gets the subsidies, and but the farmers themselves do not pay rent. Because the association does it with the subsidies. In Sibiu, that, as I mentioned, the town hall also owns the pasture, and the attribution, or like the distribution of land, it's done directly, they say, through an auction system. So it's still rent-based access, but it's based on an auction system. So the principle is the person who is able to pay the highest rent, or like the highest bidder, gets the pasture. Also, what is different is that the farmers themselves can apply for subsidies. So the farmers get the subsidy, but they pay the rent directly. I will move on to threats now. As I mentioned already, and the subsidies are quite an important element of land access. And most of the times, they stand in the way of people looking to access land for production, as it's mostly people are looking to access it. It makes much more sense for people to access the land to get the subsidies, than because they make more money like that than as if they would just work the land without being eligible for subsidies. So this, in the 2 cases that I mentioned, it creates tensions and internal conflict, especially when the farmers associations are not transparent with their fund allocation and so. Another threat is land or green grabbing, and green grabbing it refers to getting land for conservation purposes, this represents a threat to the commons, mostly because, as I mentioned in one of the cases, it's an auction system. So basically, if there is a transnational company that it's registered in a place, they could apply for land, for the common land. And given that they have much more let's say money, they could get in front of the local people. Another threat is the mismanagement. So it's an ecological threat, like overgrazing, undergrazing, and this is also related to the access to resources, so to capital, for example, and who is actually in charge of managing the resource, per se. So in some case, it's the farmers themselves, but in other cases, it's the association, and then sometimes it clashes. The regulatory complexity, as I mentioned, it's very context specific, and there is not really like easy to navigate for like the legislation. It's not easy to navigate for farmers themselves, or neither for lay people, let's say, so for the wider public. And the aging population is a threat because it's quite a European-wide threat as well, but once the population, the current farming population would die out and there is no replacement, then also this memory and knowledge would be lost, and this kind of knowledge of how to manage the commons, but also how to administrate them and take decisions. I prepared some reflection points, or I had some things that I'm concerned about, or and this is basically to what extent are these forms of community based land management truly transformative. So to how transparent is the access to land, and also who can really benefit from them, and how equal, let's say, its access, so in terms of class, gender, ethnicity, and so on. But also how to protect the rights of peasant farmers in the context of access to right to land. And I think Elias already mentioned some parts of also the CAP reform. Of course, this per hectare subsidy creates a lot of conflicts and tension, and sometimes it's not rewarding the diversity, let's say, of farming systems. Also, a EU land directive would be helpful to recognize common property regime. And also maybe this will contribute to make it less ambiguous and easier for the people on the ground to navigate. And another interesting, let's say, result from my research was to find out that having access to land, it's not enough, or having only access to the resource is not enough if you cannot kind of capitalize on it. So if you only have access to land, but then you don't have any way to sell your product, or you don't have any capital to invest to manage it properly, or you don't have access to proper decision making, then just the access to land itself, it's not going to make a difference per se. And I will close with this. Thank you for your attention, and I hope I was in time.
Gracias, Ana María, por esta presentación.
Thank you for that interesting presentation, Ana Maria.
Justamente en que permite concretizar o de alguna manera ejemplificar
Hopefully we can see some examples of these elements in Europe, all of these elements which are important in this domain. Now we'll move on to the case of Galicia. This is a presentation from Conchi Mogo. She's part of the Galician trade union, and her presentation is entitled The Surexport Case in Aterracha, the Impact of Agribusiness on the Territory and Rural Populations. So now we'll move on to Conchi's presentation, and I'd like to remind all participants that you have the opportunity to share your questions and comments through the Q&A functionality on Zoom, or you can raise your hand if you want to speak out loud. Now I'll give the floor to Conchi. Please give a brief introduction to yourself before you begin your presentation.
Yo soy Conchi Mogo.
Thank you, Christian. I'm Conchi Mogo. I'm from the Galician trade union, and I'm also part of Via Campesina Europe working group on migration and rural work, where Elias here also works. I really enjoyed Anna Maria's presentation because it's very relevant for community lands. And I'm just going to begin by giving you a bit more context on that. Let me just share my screen. So to begin, just to give you a bit more context, what is the company Surexport? We're fighting against Surexport, but this could really be any other company in agribusiness. The company Surexport is a company in Huelva, which has been commercializing berries for 20 years. It's been working in Galicia since 2013. It's also in Portugal under the name of Sudoberry and has been since 2016. So you can see all of the obstacles that we have. And this company has plantations in Morocco and in Kenya. And its strategy is to have an annual provision for the exportation of breadfruits for the whole of Europe. On the Galician territory, it's also working with 83 hectares, which might not seem very much, but it's a lot in Galicia. And at the moment, it's in the process of renting an extra 70 hectares. Then to give you a bit of context about the territory in Galicia, we are in the north of Spain. Of course, we're rural. And we have small-scale farmers. And this is different to other territories. We have small plots, but they have a big social and historical meaning for us. Surexport is setting up in a place called Terracha, which is flat land. And it has lots of water, which is what berries need. They need a lot of water. And they're facing extinction, especially more in the south. So for agribusiness, the best thing is to go to the north. The company has been in Galicia for several years, but alarm bells have really been ringing since 2021, when several workers there
Discúlpame, sí, por favor, porque dificulta un poco a los traductores. Qué pena, gracias.
Sí, perdón, lo siento. A las intérpretes lo voy a intentar.
Sorry, interpreters, I'll try and speak a bit more slowly. In summer 2021, some colleagues working at Surexport raised the alarm bells about the situation that they were seeing at the company. They weren't migrant colleagues, they were Galician colleagues in this case. But normally the company Surexport brings people who are very vulnerable to work in Galicia. They're normally women with families. And sometimes in their situations, they aren't even able to speak Spanish or French. They can only speak Arabic, which makes it very difficult to establish relationships with them. So for us, Surexport is just one other company, but there are several other companies which are grabbing land in our territories. And we can see this in several sectors, such as the mining sector or the wind turbine sector. And they're taking agricultural or livestock lands in several cases, which should have another use, not an industrial use. And why do we have this campaign with Surexport? Because it's expanding at a monumental rate in our territory, and for several reasons. We're fighting for several regions. We're fighting alongside other organizations such as trade unions, ecological organizations, feminist organizations, because we consider that this is an overall fight. This isn't just a fight for peasant organizations, but we think it's a fight for the whole of society. So just to give you some of the reasons that we have these campaigns, the first reason is abuse of the labor force and practices that most citizens know as being very close, or at least being closer to slavery than legal working conditions. Some colleagues have had to work for up to 14 hours a day. They don't have days off. Competitivity is encouraged between colleagues. They use chips to see how many hours people have worked and how many baskets of fruits they've collected. They suffer constant threats and verbal abuse, and they often earn under the minimum wage for farmers. So when we talk about agribusiness, this is often what we see, but there's a lot of things behind that. They don't have worthy conditions, worthy living conditions. Here are some photos from Huelva, and this is a model that people are trying to take to our territory and to other places. This is one of the big problems of agribusiness in general, and red fruits in particular. There's such a large demand for the labor force that they need. In Huelva, where most berries are produced, they need 100,000 people to work just in the berry season. More than half of these workers are from outside the territory. So what we saw here in Andalusia is illegal housing where hundreds of people are working, picking fruits daily, and they have very precarious lodging. We don't think that these conditions have reached Galicia yet. But we need there to be minimum living conditions.
O incluso llegando a dormir en 30 habitaciones de una pensión hasta 110 personas.
We've seen up to 110 people sleeping across 30 rooms in a Airbnb.
Bueno, la agroindustria, o sea, defines perfectamente lo que es la trata de seres humanos a todos los niveles. Hay engaños en las condiciones de contratación en origen. Es algo súper común. Cuando esto es determinante para lo que es la aceptación del contrato, el traslado, y esto es una de las características.
So this is one of the traits of human trafficking, specifically for women who their passports are taken away, and so they are under controlled. Also, we analyze the agriculture impact in the gender perspective. When it comes to red berries, 99% of people who are retrieving these red berries are women. And in Spain, it is known, in the other territories as well, that we know the violations, the rapes that we see in women in different territories, as well as also other types of sexual abuse that are hidden because of fear. Also, we consider that it is urgent to stop these practices and also to raise awareness concerning these companies that allow those abuses towards women, and that we know that in most of the cases they are under extreme vulnerability and they accept these conditions to bring some food to their families. And we also have something fundamental to remember, that at this perspective, we have the environmental impact. These types of production practices of red berries, it uses more than 4,000 cubic meters of water per hectare. So first, they don't have problems in the water supply. And also the area where we did this study is one of the less inhabited villages. And also the use of pesticides is very common in these types of production practices because there is very low organic production practices. We see that this is done in places where there is desertification and they need pesticides to produce these red berries. And something that is essential to mention, and this is something I've mentioned before, the land grabbing. Here, we are seeing how the unregulated red berries production is causing land grabbing in communities, which is very similar to what Alba Maria was mentioning. And the problem is the land grabbing for livestock or agriculture in the same community, and it impacts the community and also the neighbors. In Galician context, this is a first meeting that we had with the Montes Finales de Loencia community, and that's where Surexport company is located. Surexport was able to go in and to fight against all neighbors or villagers. It is a very serious situation, and there are people, livestock producers, who have to stop using that community because in most of the community have decided to that Surexport company rents that territory for their use, and also by using the production practices that we just mentioned a little while ago. So the industries are kicking out the villages from their agricultural territory. As a farmers organization that fights for food sovereignty, we need, as this organization, to be focused on the community and also the agriculture producers who do produce good food for the community and protect the environment as well. And concerning the consumption, our consumption is also politically. Our consumption doesn't constitute another political practice, but it has consequences, whether it's politically or environmentally. Our consumption, we must remember that we have a level of freedom. We know that we can reduce it based on a few factors, but we have to move as a aware society. So I think it is important that we work towards with the society. We can work so consumers organize themselves and create this pressure against the market supplies. For example, in Denmark, since 2020, no product from Surexport come into the region because in their territory, they said that no product will be there from Surexport. So that's a little bit about the context. I will be finishing up in a moment. So we're working on that in some periods more than others because the farmers organizations, we have bureaucracy problems that are even bigger at times and different problems that we encounter. But last year, in June 2022, we did a meeting, a European meeting, where different organizations participated as well, whether it was from the nation, from different areas of Europe. It was feminist groups, farmers groups, different types of groups, and it was under the name of agroecology or barbarie, how the industry is mistreating us. So that was the name. We did a little bit of a protest. We discussed some topics, and you can see it. The manifesto is here. It's translated in different languages. And we think that the fight against the industry has to be from the whole society itself, because we consider that it's a global problem and it has different negative consequences, whether it is for the farmers. And we have different logos. We want more farmers and more food producers, and the industry is going to bring us just more slavery and violation towards our rights. So if you want to consult a little bit about our work that we did, thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much, Conchi, for that presentation. It is wonderful to have these concrete cases that in some way or another they lend the problems that we see, and also we identify certain path of actions to stop the degradation of the land. So we invite you to pose a few questions, a few comments to the panelists. Let's remember that the Q&A option is open for everybody. And if some of you would like to participate directly and speak, you can do that as well. We'll give you the option to, or the opportunity to speak up. We do have a few questions, a couple of questions. One of them is from Yul Verde. It's a question that is in Spanish, so I think it's a little bit open for everybody. I would say everybody who would like to answer, any of the panelists. So the question is the following: what relevance, or in what sense would it make to speak about foreignization of land in the European context, the foreign ownership? And about that, what would be the difference with respect to the context of southern countries? So I don't know if any of the participants would like to comment about this question.
Repito la pregunta.
Repeat the question for everybody. What relevance, or what sense would it make to speak about foreign ownership of land in the European context? And about that, what would be the difference with respect to the context of the southern countries? So let's remember that the conference in Brazilian context discusses about this, the acquisition of land from foreigners. I don't know if any of the participants here would like to comment about that. Conchi, Ana Maria, would you like to say something about that?
Je veux bien dire 2 mots, mais d'autres personnes pourront compléter.
I'm just going to say something brief, but other people can complete my thoughts. The main problem is land concentration in the hands of capitalists, who above all are seeking for a return on investment, which is completely the opposite of the values of small-scale farming, which seeks to secure the agricultural use of land in the long term. So what's important here is that investors seeking a return on a large investment try to take in large swaths of land in Brazil, France, no matter where. It's often locals who intervene, but of course there are also foreigners, particularly people from the north who have higher financial abilities to obtain usage rights everywhere in the world. So the question of foreignization exists, but more beyond that, what's important is the expansion of capitalist agriculture, which is expanding.
Thank you so much, Robert. I think somebody raised their hand. Christian and then Jorge. Jorge, if you would like to speak, you can go ahead, please. Well, hello, everybody. First of all, it was a very interesting discussion. I'd like to add something that affects everybody in this in the Spain context. In Spain, we are going through an impactful process concerning the investment. Traditionally, we're speaking about the butcher funds, which is an investment fund that look different sectors of interest to invest on something that is out of the interest of the public interest. It's just economic interest. In Spain, after the economic crisis that we had in the last years of 2008, the butchers were controlled by some companies in the US, and it was used for lodging. And we had a small period during the last years where the focus of investment was agriculture. So agriculture was being used to use a maximization of economic growth, and is affecting the farmers of the area. I think this is a phenomenon that the different agriculture unions are exposing these issues that are happening within the territories. And we are seeing also the agriculture exploitation and how it's being used for these final objectives, which should be the agricultural use for food. Another economic activity is the renewable energies that can be more of public interest and also social interest. And I think this is affecting in a very direct way. And also I'd like to mention that something that Conchi mentioned, that the agro-businesses in Spain have a role within this context. We are also promoting the foreign ownership of land. For example, the case of Surexport is causing impacts in other countries, and I just wanted to mention these two things, which I think it's important to share. Thank you so much, Jorge, for that question. I don't know if any of the panelists would like to react towards what he said.
Okay, tenemos dos manos.
Okay, I think we have two hands. So let's go with Christian and then Alex.
Oui, merci.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to say that what surfaces the conversation about the increase of anonymous societies or agricultural groups which are managing land is based on the fact that the owner is no longer an individual. Instead, it could be a financial fund. And when we talk about financial funds or investment funds, we all know that an international logic exists with these funds that has got very little to do with borders anymore. And their logic is to be as profitable as possible. And in order to use Deng Xiaoping's expression, who says that it doesn't matter what you choose, a cat is a cat. I think that capitalists, no matter where they come from, are always the same. And of course, there are countries where there's more capital simply because money is concentrated, and large financial funds are concentrated also in certain countries. So of course, it's more evident. But this is the reason why we wanted to broach both phenomena at the same time, the foreignization, which is more noticeable in Brazil, but also the phenomenon of financing, which is more visible and which is creating serious threats.
Thank you, Christian. And now, Emmanuel from MIP, I think you raised your hand. I don't know if you would like to say something or intervene.
Sorry, it was a mistake. I was going to talk about the foreignization of agriculture. Sorry, no, it was a technical mistake. But we are very interested by blocking mechanisms and also the question of what to do with businesses that have agricultural land but who don't have the aim of using agricultural land. Is there a way to change the use of this land? Is there a way to resell this land because it doesn't have agriculture as its main aim? Sorry, I just improvised a question which I would like to know more about. Thank you, Emmanuel, for your question. Emmanuel is asking about land possession by businesses that are not focusing on the agricultural dynamic. So I don't know if any of the panelists would like to respond to this question. I could say a few words about this issue because in 2017, Deputy Dominique Potier proposed in the Parliament for all businesses who exploit more than a certain number of hectares should be obliged to create an independent business separate from the agricultural one. So there is in France an obligation for all societies to be obliged to create an ad hoc society. But I don't know how this is translated because I don't know what kind of controls exist for this law. So it's possible, but I don't know if this law is actually applied.
Thank you so much, Robert. Also, again, if you have any questions or if you have any comments to say. Personally speaking, I will allow myself to, and I see other people who would like to say something. I will allow myself to say something. I come from a country on the global south. I come from Colombia specifically. And I believe that there is a characteristic in the global south, not in all of them, but at least in most of them. And they are importers of products. There is failure when it comes to the capital of the countries, and they are capital net exporters, which is a structural characteristic in international politics. But I think that the nuance that Robert is explaining, and also that Christian just mentioned, is that finally the capitals that reach the countries before the companies that are meeting up in the investment funds, it introduces a different logic. That's where the foreignization, the foreign ownership comes along, and there are other problems. For example, that's what we call globalization or neocolonization, that weren't way advanced before, and there was a certain type of interest in using this investment, nationally speaking. But of course, we are in this situation of globalization or neocolonization that is creating this problem in the origin of investment. And we have to see that this land grabbing happens interinstitutionally, it happens inside the region, and even nationally speaking. So I think that's the idea that Robert was sharing, and also Christian, in the sense of having this relevant idea. What is behind the investment? This was mentioned by Jorge, specifically economically, and to accumulate capital. So thank you for the question, that opened the debate.
Como lo vieron, intervino Jorge Cabero. Él es director técnico del CERAI. El CERAI es el Centro de Estudios Rurales y de Agricultura Internacional, una organización localizada
An organization in Spain. Jorge is going to help us with elements to help us synthesize the discussions that we've already had. So now we'll give the floor to Jorge to tell us more about his ideas to synthesize our topics. Thank you, Christian, for all of your coordination, and thank you to all of the panelists and participants in this space today. I haven't had time to write down all of my ideas, but as we've said, this is an open space. We're going to invite all of our colleagues here to follow the discussion as well in the forum on the webpage, where we'll continue these discussions and these conversations. We'll try to keep encouraging that open discussion. So I encourage you all to carry on with this discussion in all of the territories and today's territory of Europe. We've been able to identify that peasant agriculture in general affects Europe very generally. This is something that's generally affecting the whole of Europe. Land concentration and capitalist agriculture and other sectors as well that we've talked about today, which are very active in the sector of agricultural land, is an advance, a very significant advance of capitalism. And this has to do with concentration and maximization of economic interest. We've mentioned a bit about the development of food and territory and all of the ecosystem values of the land and the social and cultural values of the land. So this is the process which is currently underway. It's true that we haven't had time to deal with another topic, which is the model. I think it's also important to talk about how the companies which we're seeing here are also present in other territories. Our colleagues from Via Campesina Europe have given us a horizon for regulation in Europe. We think it's a good line of action for us to take because often in European territories, this work from a European community perspective reaches the territories in several countries. And we think this directive is very important, especially coming from the foundations of a process which is also linked to other legislative processes, such as the Declaration of Peasant Rights and the voluntary directives of access to the land. And we want to see this increasingly in our countries because it's something which hasn't traditionally been taken as a foundation. And we think this foundation needs to work with this directive on a European level. And it's also very interesting to see that this process is a territorialized process. It's adapted to each country. We all know that each country has its own circumstances, its own culture, and we need to work on this process alongside each other from a general perspective, a general European perspective, but also a perspective from each country. The legislation that Robert has talked about in France is an example of how we can keep regularizing these directives. Of course, there's still a little room for improvement because all legislation does have its flaws, but here we have a good horizon to move on within other countries and to keep basing our regulations on. And it's very positive to know that we are seeing an advance, progress. Ana Maria has given examples of traditional uses of the land and which are also regulated. And these can help us to find alternative models for people who live in the territories, maybe through comments or through organizations or associations that manage them. Ana Maria has also shown us that there are flaws, but this is a good model that can help us to look at Earth and the land in a more democratic way. And this is a very important aspect. And protecting these land regulations is something that we need to promote and defend in different countries. Because although we have seen some problems, there's always a positive aspect. All of the presentations have managed the common agricultural policy as a key element to change this concentration dynamic. This question of there being a priority or a measure to favor concentration. This is something that we need to deal with. We are now in the new policy, and I wish we'd got here in a more effective way, but this is still essential. It's a key to help us revert this tendency that we're seeing. And Conchi explained to us very directly about the economic value models, as well as food and social models, environmental models. She's talked about the elements, and she's talked about how mobilization and cooperation between different actors, we can take measures which go further and which can affect these models, and how we're organizing them from the ground up to fight for a model which responds more to the needs of society as a whole, which is our objective. We want to find land access models which favor agriculture and cohabitation in our territories, and which favor the general interest and not interests of particular parties. So I'll just end on that. I don't know if I've forgotten anything. I've tried to get everything, but let me know if you want to make any nuances. But here is my general summary. So thank you. Thank you, Jorge. I think your synthesis, your summary has been quite clear. Does anyone have any comments or questions or nuances to make? Someone has put their hand up. Christian. Could you give the floor to El Kabir?
I actually wanted to ask a question
Par rapport à la directive européenne,
about the European directive. Elias explained to us how it's going, and I'd like to know at what points of the discussion are we in terms of Europe, the European Parliament, and what reactions are happening right now? What is the strategy to get these directives adopted? Yeah, I can answer now, or should we wait for another question? As you wish. Okay, I'll go ahead then. So what's the strategy for this directive in terms of the institutions, right, Christian? That's the question. So first of all, we're going to present it collectively, that is, as a directive for the European Commission. We're going to meet them on the 7th of March in Brussels. We've already met this person before. The representatives of CVC have met this person already. So that's the initial part about the directive. And the second part of the institutional strategy is to present elements in every file of the European Union that relates to land. So the directive on land use, for example, the issue of carbon, which risks the increase of land concentration, also files on generational renewal, which really require a discussion at the national level. Ministries for Agriculture talk about installations a lot. And when we talk about this, institutions pay attention. So what are their responses? Socialist parliament members, of course, are in favor. The people from the Commission are not, because there isn't any European disposition regulation on land. That is the responsibility of member states. So, there's an obstacle from the start, but the strategy is to make land be seen as a natural resource and to talk about the freedom of products. And if we see it as a natural resource, we could remove it from current regulations. Even the Commission, which says we can't regulate land because we can't intervene in the freedom of movement of capital and products, they still mention land as a special asset. We met people who work in finance, for example, sanctions, DG FISMA it's called. So that's a general idea of where we're at. But now, once the regulation will be is published, it'll be sent to the European Commission for Agriculture. So the person in charge of this specific issue, on the 7th of March, we'll have an event when we'll talk about generational renewal, ecology, and it'll be online. You can find information on our website.
Había entonces una mano levantada, el Kabir, si quieres.
El Kabir has a hand up. Would you like to take the floor?
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci
Good
bien.
morning, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this regional gathering. This allowed me to enrich my knowledge, particularly in terms of collective land management. I wonder about the meeting date of the African region, because I haven't seen any fixed dates for this call. Thank you.
El Kabir por este.
Thank you, El Kabir, for your comments. And just to answer your question, the date hasn't been defined yet. I think you're referring to a project that we're still working on in 2025. This is something that we'll define further into the future, but of course we'll share the information through various means. We're still working on the preparation with all of the different organizations, but we will announce the dates soon. I see another hand up, which will make the last question before we close, because it's now 4:02. I'm seeing the name as XE17.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci beaucoup. Je m'appelle Morndoye, ici au Sénégal. Donc,
hello, everybody. My name is Ndoye. I'm in Senegal. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this meeting.
En tout cas, assister aux exposés des panélistes, mais quand même, à travers les questions et les réponses, j'ai eu quand même l'idée.
A debate has happened in parallel through the questions and responses, which has been very interesting. Regarding land concentration. Sorry, his connection isn't great. I can't really hear him.
qu'il y a des cas, finalement, est-ce qu'il y a des cas
So are there cases
qu'on a des arrêtements d'entreprises agricoles qui n'a pas
with agricultural agreements
de paysans? Et si ça là existe aussi, est-ce qu'il y en a, comment s'est passé les arrangements et aussi comment les différentes parties prenantes ont été impliquées de manière inclusive et participative dans ce processus-là. Et aussi, on sait très bien que dans les pays du Sud, il y a une dualité de droit foncier, le régime coutumier et aussi le régime moderne, on dit le droit moderne. Est-ce qu'à travers ces cas-là, s'il en existe, est-ce que c'est comment ils ont pu traiter ces deux droits-là, le droit coutumier et le droit moderne sur le foncier? Sinon, s'il n'y en a pas des cas qui ont été présentés, comment vous voyez, comment les panélistes ou les
how do you panelists see
pour penser à trouver une solution alternative à ces cas qui sont très fréquents,
all the alternative solutions to these threats?
et plus précisément aussi au Sénégal, parce qu'il y a des agrobusiness qui viennent s'installer dans le monde paysan et que pour la plupart, ils ne respectent pas en tout cas les coutumes et aussi les droits des paysans qui sont là où ils sont installés. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thank you.
Bueno, dicen los intérpretes que tienen un poco de
The interpreters are struggling to hear and interpret the question. I do understand French, but the sound quality is a bit limited.
Oui, oui, oui.
Et
donc,
posez juste une question pour que ça soit plus clair, si vous voulez.
Just one question, so it's a bit clearer. I'd like to know, in southern countries,
est-ce qu'il y a des cas qui ont eu à traiter ces genres d'espèces dans les exposés que vous avez eu à faire? Je n'étais pas là lorsqu'il y avait les présentations. J'ai pris des cours. Donc,
sorry, I can't interpret him.
Des agricoles qui ont pu traiter ces questions-là sans pour autant déposséder les paysans de leur terre. L'autre, s'il n'y en a pas de cas, est-ce que ce panel-là, bien cette organisation, pourrait envisager de travailler sur des modèles alternatifs qui permettraient aux paysans de résider là où ils sont. Et
are there alternative models that would allow farmers to defend themselves
dans leur localité, ne peuvent pas prendre
in the areas where they live or work and avoid other actors to concentrate their land?
bueno, es realmente una lástima, pues este problema de conexión que nos impide entender claramente la pregunta. Creo que es igual
I
para
think
los
with the connection, we're struggling to understand the question. I think the French speakers and the interpreters have the same problem.
la pregunta. Entonces, te invitaríamos a compartirla directamente.
So we invite you to directly write the question in the chat box.
La discusión no se cierra en este momento. En la página web de
We are going to close the meeting soon, but our discussion isn't over. On the web page for the fourth discussion cycle, you'll be able to find a space which is dedicated to discussion and where you can ask further questions. So I would invite our previous speaker to ask their question in that space, or if not directly in the chat box. We will share the link with all of the panelists so your questions are answered. Unfortunately, we have to finish now. Our time is up. This doesn't end here, though. As I was saying, you can continue sharing questions and comments on the webpage. And as I was saying at the beginning, on the 7th of March, we're going to have the closing conference of this 4th cycle of discussion. We'll send you information for that soon. We'll send you a Zoom link so you can dial in. And we'll also send you the program for the webinar. So watch out for that. So I would like to thank the 4 panelists, Elias, Robert, Ana Maria, and Conchi, for your interesting speeches. And I'd also like to thank Jorge for his summary, which allowed us to have a more general vision of the topic. I would also like to thank all of the participants who have shared questions and comments. And I would especially like to thank the interpreters for their translation. Their work is quite difficult and tiring, but it's essential for us to be able to hold sessions like these. So I would like to close this session and thank everyone once again. And I invite you to visit our website and do watch out for the rest of this debate. Thank you and have a nice rest of the day.
Gracias.